Yesterday, Pennsylvania Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman, who suffered a stroke back in May, tweeted, "Recovering from a stroke in public isn't easy, but in January, I'm going to be much better and Dr. Oz will still be a fraud."
NBC News' Dasha Burns sat down with Fetterman for an interview earlier this week, his first in-person sit-down since he suffered a stroke. Burns said, quote, "In a small talk before my interview with Fetterman, it wasn't clear he understood what I was saying. We have a clip from that interview we wanted to play, so let's watch."
Can voters trust that you will be able to do this job on day one?
Yeah, of course. I always thought I was pretty empathetic, emphatic. I think I was very, empathetic. That's an example of the stroke, empathetic. Yeah. I always thought I was very empathetic before having a stroke. But now after having that stroke, I really understand much more kind of the challenges that Americans have day in and day out.
So you say you're on the road to full recovery, but right now, voters really have to take your word for it. We've asked for your medical records. We've asked to have a conversation with someone from your medical team, to interview your physician. You've declined those requests. Why?
Well, I feel like we have been very transparent in a lot of different ways. When our doctor has already given a letter saying that I'm able to serve and to be running.
I mean, respectfully, that letter from your physician, that was 6 months ago. Don't voters deserve to know your status now?
Being in front of thousands and thousands of people and having interviews and getting around all across Pennsylvania, that gives everybody and the voters decide, if they think that it's really the issue.
Burns notes that because of Fetterman's stroke, his campaign required closed captioning technology for this interview. CNN headlined this as "Fetterman now uses closed captioning to understand conversations," to which someone tweeted, "What the F are we doing, man?" regarding this image. And in the image, you see, I think Sanjay Gupta there, using a model brain to have a conversation about Fetterman's capacity here. This is very divisive. A lot of people were saying that basically, overemphasizing in the title in the way that they did, it starts to suggest that people who are hearing impaired, which is I think what's going on with the closed captioning, it's not a cognitive issue, it's a auditory one, shouldn't be in public office, kind of casting aspersions about the idea that people who are otherwise physically compromised shouldn't be in office. What do you make of that?
Look, I'm starting to get a little annoyed with some of this. Of course, it's not. Some of the accommodations being made at this point, it's not the same as like someone saying well, what if Dr. Oz needs to sit on a stool because he's short? Okay, the question is, there's some there's clear evidence of cognitive impairment in the way he speaks. That comes through when he speaks for any length of time. And it is not at all wrong to scrutinize and wonder if it's just beyond his ability to speak, but also to think and to reason. And again, this has been a theme of the day, I guess.
Nobody
an
cares.
R's and R's, a D a D. Maybe nobody cares, but... Yeah. But this is, he is, and we already have people in the Senate who are not cognitively capable of doing their jobs. We won't say her name, but we all know who we're talking about.
Dianne Feinstein.
We said her name, there we go.
It's Dianne Feinstein. Yeah, it's not a secret.
But it's not, okay, but you can't, even if you're going to ultimately say, well, a D's a D, they can't expect that he won't face scrutiny over this. And I was quite perturbed by this BuzzFeed news article that interviewed disability activists saying that how dare this interview him in this way and make it sound like he has some kind of a problem. Quote, "The way Burns handled the interview will only worsen attitudes and violence towards disabled people at a time when virtual accommodations are being removed left and right after they were implemented in 2020. And I really take issue with that idea that this has a social harm to scrutinize a candidate to be one of the most 100 important legislators in the country.
Scrutinize a candidate is a really big idea. So let's separate some things out, because I also agree that it is, of course, right to be able to scrutinize a candidate, but what are we talking about here? I think the choice to emphasize the hearing part was a tactical and substantive mistake, because I don't think that's not cognitive related. Not being able to hear, it does not really bear on your ability to make any decisions. I shouldn't have qualified that. It does not at all bear on your ability to make decisions, to be a good leader. It is a hurdle to overcome in terms of communication, but there's many communication hurdles, and people who are hearing impaired and blind and all other kinds of things live very productive lives and are contributing members to society. And I do think that focusing in on that is a mistake, because that isn't really even the issue that people are most concerned about. The issue that people are most concerned about is whether or not there is an actual substantive, not just communication issue, but a cognitive issue that will affect
which there is some evidence
thinking.
of.
Okay, so, and again, and a lot of other people have pointed out that there have been disclosures of this nature about interviews with Fetterman before this.
Right.
Other interviews in the text or, as an addendum to the article have pointed out that the interview was conducted using this kind of transcription support software. And it hasn't blown up in this way. And it was the critique here is the choice to foreground it as the story, even if the story is still about these other, I think, more substantive concerns. Why the focus on the hearing? Do you think that there's anything to that aspect of it?
But I don't think that's going to cause violence or harm.
Sure, and I agree with people overusing the word violence, but generally speaking, the question that I just asked.
Maybe that was the wrong way to frame it. Although, I don't know, it's not totally possible to separate it necessarily from, him becoming more hard of hearing, because he had a very serious stroke. That it would be my understanding. I'm not a doctor. I'm just looking at how people look at this. That it would be kind of unusual for him to have his ability to speak affected by the stroke, but everything is absolutely 100% totally all right upstairs. Otherwise, that they're related. This brain science, it's hard to...
Right, when his point about how all you can do is judge me by my behavior, just like all you can do to judge anybody's cognitive aptitude is to talk to them and judge their behavior and their decision making. I think that's true, and that will bear out. And again, an R and a D and a D is a D, and people want to know how these people are going to vote more than what they're going to say. I think the one other part I want to talk about, just mention briefly, is the call for more medical information. It's hard to know what's going on there, because that is something that's weaponized often in these situations. There was a whole brouhaha over whether Trump was being honest about his medical records. There was a brouhaha over Bernie Sanders not ever being able to disclose enough to whet people's appetites. And, I think there are some HIPAA kind of concerns here.
I think often there is no level of disclosure that would satisfy reporters. So I get that. Although it sounds like in this case, I take her point that, one note from your doctor like 6 months ago might not really. Sure.
So maybe it's time for an update. But this is. I think it is interesting.
I think we'll get that day after the election.
Maybe. We'll follow up if we do.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. Same rising time, same rising place for more rising. I want to thank our wonderful staff today who are actually taking care of my dogs, which I had no choice to bring into the studio. They're running about. I can hear one of them crying. So I'm very grateful to our staff for taking care of them while we produce the show today.
And we've established that one's a libertarian and one's a socialist. So I argue to get to carry the socialist one in the left chair, but maybe next time they're in the studio. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts and on Roku. Take care.
Bye-bye.